Will reviving Saudi-Iran relations turn bitter rivals into a productive partnership? A Chinese brokered deal between the adversaries has some praising a move toward peace, while others fear it could undermine the U.S. and threaten Israel. Who wins and who might lose in this rapprochement? I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's newsmaker is the Saudi-Iran relationship. Last week, Saudi Arabia and Iran, two of the most formidable powers in the Middle East, agreed to restore relations in a deal brokered by China. It's a major diplomatic breakthrough after years of often dangerous animosity, and it represents Beijing's first foray into Middle East mediation. The Saudi-Iran rivalry dates back decades, but formal ties collapsed in 2016 after the Saudi embassy in Tehran was overrun by protesters following Riyadh's execution of a revered Shia cleric. Now, embassies will be reopened in Riyadh and Tehran within 2 months, and Saudi's finance minister says investment in Iran could pick up very quickly. Saudi and Iran have also agreed to restore the cooperation and security agreements signed in 1998 and 2001. If peace holds, and that remains to be seen, it could have far-reaching implications for regional security, stability, and geopolitics. Well, one country hoping to see change as a result of this agreement is Yemen. Yemen's conflict erupted in 2014 when the Iran-backed Houthis seized Sana'a and much of the country's north. A Saudi-led coalition then intervened in a bid to restore the internationally recognized government to power. Diplomats have long been trying to broker peace in Yemen, and this could mark a real step toward that end.
It is expected that the positive development in the ties between Iran and Saudi Arabia is, God willing, followed by positive and good results related to the issue of Yemen. Of course, the issue of Yemen and making decisions about its domestic issues is in the hands of the Yemenis themselves. Since the beginning of the war, we believe that war was not a solution.
And while this rapprochement certainly has major implications for the Middle East, it also has repercussions for the U.S. China's mediation role could signal a shift in the global order, and it certainly demonstrates the growing influence of China in the region. The White House was initially reluctant to praise China, but they have praised the restored ties between Saudi and Iran.
This was not about the PRC. This was about what Iran and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia committed to. When it comes to our role in the region and whether, as I've read, our role may be being supplanted, some allege. I have a difficult time wrapping my head around how our role could be supplanted when no country on earth has done more to help build a more stable, a more integrated region.
Much like the U.S., Israel is also concerned about the deal. Good Saudi-Iran relations could set back Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's efforts to isolate Tehran and normalize ties with Riyadh. It could also hinder any eventual military strike against Iranian nuclear sites.
Brilliant stroke by China and Iran to undercut Saudi-American and Saudi-Israeli normalization. This is an object lesson in how to lose friends and influence no one in this era of great power competition.
Well, there is a lot to analyze in this development, so joining me now to debate what it could mean are, from Tehran, Mohammad Marandi, a professor of English at Tehran University. From Kuwait City is Fahad Al-Shelaimi, the head of the Gulf Peace and Security Forum. And from Washington, we have Des Roches, a professor at the Near East South Asia Center for Strategic Studies. Thanks all so much for being with us. Fahad, I'll start with you. You know, one conclusion some have drawn is that this is kind of just a recognition that this ongoing rivalry hasn't gained either side an advantage. In fact, it's actually proven mostly lose-lose. So this doesn't mean Saudi and Iran are friends, but rather that they will manage their animosity and their competing interests better so as to not cost everyone. Is that what it is?
Thank you for having me, and this regards to you and to your guests on the panelist. I think it's early to say that there is a lose-lose situation or it's a win-win situation. The most important, there is a dialogue on reducing the tension in the area, trying to adopt change, positive changes in the area where everyone could feel secure and keeping his interests safe. I think people in the Gulf are wondering what is next. How does it happen? How are they going to make it according to the intentions and the deals? Is going to be a peace in Yemen? Is Lebanon will elect a new president according to the democracy that they have? Is the tension in Syria will reduce and Syria will come to the Arab League? Many questions. I think the answer could come from the Iranian side. We felt not secure with our neighbors, the Iranian neighbors, for a decade. Now, I think people in the Gulf and the governments, I guess, feeling there is a window, a chance of opportunity to explore some peace agreement or some cooperations agreement.
Okay.
Although if you go to the geopolitics now, what the war in Ukraine, the situation in Europe, the cold relationship with the Americans and the Saudis, I think there is a good factors that is people encourage the politician to have a dialogue.
Let me cross to Tehran then and ask Mohammad Marandi how you think this will work. And would you actually consider it a breakthrough, as some have described it?
It is an important step. We have to keep in mind that this began over 3 years before, when General Soleimani went to Baghdad to meet the Iraqi prime minister at that time, Dr. Adel Abdul Mahdi. He was murdered at the airport by Trump and the US, but he was on his way to meet the prime minister to discuss, as the Iraqi prime minister said, a letter from Saudi Arabia about de-escalation and potential rapprochement. And of course, afterwards, we had the Iraqis again mediating, and the deputy chief of the Iranian Supreme National Security Council and his Saudi counterpart met a couple of times. So this has been a long time coming. It's been in the works for a while. But the fact that the Americans murdered General Soleimani, there's no doubt that the Americans knew why he was in Baghdad. They have
okay, but I know. So you think the Americans would have liked to see this derailed in a sense, or at least delay it as much as possible?
Yes, I think that the biggest problem is that there are those who do not want the tensions in the region to decline. They don't want the divisions to be mended. I think the most important actor in this regard is the United States. It's also the Israeli regime. But it seems up to now that the different sides in the region are determined to push this forward.
You know, let me cross to David then, because it's actually interesting that you say that, Professor Marandi, because, you know, David, far from a breakthrough, you seem to think very little of this rapprochement, especially when you hear China described as a new power broker. I want to talk about that in a second, but, I mean, is it actually in U.S. interest then to downplay this, especially when, and I want to read to you the take of one certain Saudi analyst who is actually the president of the Saudi American Public Affairs Committee. This is what he had to say, which sounds very much in line with what Professor Marandi was describing. He said, "I can sense that the U.S. intelligence community is now looking for nothing but a way through which they foil the Saudi-Iranian rapprochement. The U.S. used Iran as a boogeyman against Saudi Arabia for 4 decades. Riyadh wants to put an end to that cheap blackmailing tactic. It is time for the U.S. to abandon its classic foreign policy tactics, the strategic balance, and low-intensity conflicts." What do you make of that?
Well, low-intensity conflict is a military concept, not a not a strategic foreign policy guiding concept. I don't know what to make of that. Look, from the American perspective, our interests in the region are stability. Instability is caused by two things. One is planning, malign activity, like Qasem Soleimani's activities, which the U.S. intelligence community, whether you agree with it or not, our assessment, the American assessment, is that he was responsible for the death of 685 other Americans in Iraq and was planning attacks on others, which is why he was killed. The second danger, which is actually a greater danger, I think, in the Gulf, is just misunderstanding and miscalculation leading to accidental war. This is the guiding fear when we look, for example, at India and Pakistan's confrontation. And I think that what we've seen here is basically Iran and Saudi Arabia going back to where they were in 2016 before Iran stormed the embassy of Saudi Arabia. This is just an agreement to reestablish embassies. It's not groundbreaking, but I think it is welcome because it promotes ways for Saudi Arabia and Iran to talk to each other and minimize misunderstandings and potential miscalculation. So, Americans in particular are always unhappy with the Iranian practice of storming foreign embassies, which are supposed to be protected by the Vienna Convention. But, honestly, this is not a treaty of amity. This is not a realignment. It's just an agreement to reestablish missions, the same as China has in Washington. Yeah.
Yeah, and like I said, I do want to talk about China in just a second. Mohammad Marandi, let me come back to you. I mean, you've already established that you do think the United States does not want to see this happen for the reasons you've listed. But I have to come to you with another analysis from a Saudi. Again, the same president of the Saudi American Public Relation Affairs Committee, who actually had said that he thinks this presents an opportunity to Iran to become a normal nation rather than a revolutionary one, and that Saudi can show Iran another path. Is that how Iran sees it? Because I don't get the feeling that you're necessarily on the same page with Saudi there, as you might see that as somewhat maybe condescending.
First, I'd like to point out that your American guest is concerned about Iran storming embassies. They should first think about the fact that the United States bombed the Chinese embassy in Yugoslavia, killing Chinese citizens and diplomats. And in addition to that, the malign activity actually comes from the United States.
Okay, right. That's what we said. We understand that you do believe that that's the U.S. mission.
Because he alluded to General Soleimani. We have a WikiLeaks document, an email from Sullivan, where he says, Jake Sullivan, where he says in an email to Hillary Clinton on February the 12th, 2012, that in Syria, Al-Qaeda is on our side.
Okay.
So that is the current U.S. National Security Advisor. So
but Professor Marandi, I was asking about how some Saudis feel about this, in that they can set an example now for Iran to follow, that again, you can now become, as they put it, a normal country, not a revolutionary one. I'm wondering how that makes you feel as an Iranian going into this relationship. Do you think you can learn something from Saudi?
Different people and different Saudis can have different views on different issues. And obviously, Iranians have differing views on different issues as well. What is important for us is to reduce the possibility of the United States and other malign actors from being able to create division in our region, to prevent them from being able to turn one nation against another, or one community against another, like the Americans did after occupying Iraq, where they turned different sects and different ethnic groups against each other in order to maintain control in Baghdad, leading to a catastrophe in the country after the catastrophe of the invasion, which came after the catastrophe of the sanctions, and so on. So for Iran, the important thing is what Riyadh thinks. If the government in Riyadh and the government in Tehran can come to an agreement, and which they did in Beijing, then that is what is important. And also, what I should add, and I think you want to get to that next, is that there's a huge difference between how Beijing has behaved here and how the Americans behave. When we look at the Palestinian peace plan that the Americans used to put forward, where Clinton and the Israeli regime and the Palestinians were standing together, the United States was no honest broker. They had complete disregard for the Palestinian people. That's not how you do peace. But in this case, the Chinese did not play such a destructive role.
I know Iran does see China in particular as a non-meddling power. And that seems to be why Iran does trust the Chinese more as a broker, because you don't feel they meddle in internal politics. But let me come to Fahad, because Professor Marandi was talking about some of the divisions that have been created that maybe could be mended in the region. You seem to think that this arrangement could particularly help Lebanon, as you mentioned before, and allow them to elect a new president. But you mentioned elect a new president, you said earlier, free from any pressure from Hezbollah.
Hezbollah, exactly.
How would that work?
I think I like the expression, and I said that expression many times. We are confused in the Gulf, and the world is confused between dealing with the Iran revolutionary state or Iran democratic states. If we could, sometimes we listen to the Minister of Foreign Affairs, the Iranian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, with their nice and soft statements. Second day, we have an opposite, totally the opposite from the head of Revolutionary Guard, threatening and warning. The next day on Friday speech, Friday prayer speech, we could hear another aggressive words. So I think the people, and especially us, we are confused which statement we can build in a good and strong relationship. I think the American role in the area will still exist and still strong. We have in the Gulf, we have a very strong relationship with our strategic partners, the Americans. But I think the Saudi wanted to test another political maneuver. So at least they could make another choice, another pressure on the Biden administration, and the meddling that's happening during Obama, then stop, then Biden comes. Referring to Lebanon, I think the Iranians have to do their own homework. They're supposed to stop interfering, or at least reduce interfering in Lebanese domestic affairs. Lebanon must get a new free president away from the influence of Hezbollah. And I think that our neighbor, the Iranian, could at least put more advice on Hezbollah to work with the current and get a new elected Lebanese president. He has a good cooperations with the GCC. We are the big donors for the Lebanon states. There is a billions or hundreds of millions of project, but Hezbollah is blocking the way under the Iranian influence. Hopefully we could see a positive variables sign in the next year or in the next 6 months. As I mentioned, either in Yemen, in Syria, in Lebanon.
I mean, Hezbollah in particular might be one of those obstacles that could make this relationship a lot more complicated, let's put it this way, this relationship building going forward. But I need to come back to David, because we talked about your viewing of China as what people are calling a power broker now in the Middle East. You really don't think that's the case at all. Why?
Well, the bottom line is, when you have negotiations, both sides have to have somebody that they trust to represent their interests in the negotiations. It's clear from Mohammed's. I won't speak in detail, but a lot of the sentiments he's expressed, rightly or wrongly, I think wrongly, he thinks rightly, those are commonly shared in Iran, and I think that it will be a very long time before anyone in Iranian power regards the United States as a suitable broker to represent Iran's interests. Similarly, when the United States negotiated the return of the Sinai to Egypt, Israel only trusted the United States to broker that deal. And fortunately, Egypt did as well. So we shouldn't be surprised that Iran doesn't, go to the United States. I mean, this deal was first worked by Oman, and Iraq, China is the logical choice to do it. But once again, all that we're talking about is going back to 2016, before the Iranian government organized or permitted the storming of the Saudi embassy in Tehran. And that's it. It's just an exchange of missions. Now, the big questions here are, as our guest from Kuwait has pointed out, the behavior there. Is Iran going to behave as a state or as a revolutionary movement? And I think that the issues Saudi Arabia is going to look at is, first off, if the Iranian Revolutionary Guard continues to, as the British government has pointed out, threaten the life of the Iranian television network that Saudi Arabia funds in London. Secondly, as also mentioned by our guest from Kuwait, if there is continued sponsors of proxy activities in Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Yemen, the eastern province of Saudi Arabia, Bahrain. So, all of this is of concern, but all of these are concerns that can be moderated if there is at least an open channel of communication, and that's all an embassy provides. And I think the United States welcomes, the provision of channels for communications between two countries who have often mischaracterized or misunderstood each other's motives. And the United States welcomes that, as President Biden said.
Okay. I'll tell you what, I wanted to ask as well about the Abraham Accords now and where all this leaves Israel and the relationship that they hoped would develop more strongly with Saudi. Let me turn to Kuwait City. Does this throw a spanner in the works for that relationship, and should Israel be worried?
I think in my analysis, I think that the Iranian wants to reduce the threat or the possible threats that comes from different sides. The Gulf side, the Israelis, the American, the European also. So I think they decided to at least try to solve one files, which is the Saudi-Iranian relations and the intervening in the neighboring countries, so they could face the Israeli threat and the American pressure in the next few months. And the Israelis, they were disappointed but we also have a kind of not trusting the Israelis, because they will make a deal. Maybe they will make a deal, and this is a political work behind closed door with the Iranian on us. So the best way is to try to get our benefit, our political benefit, reduce the tension with Iran, and let Iran try to solve their problems with the Americans, with the 5+1 committee, with the ballistic missiles threat against the neighboring countries, and with the Israelis. I confirm again, I think the GCC will still have a strong relationship with the American, strategic relationship with the American. But at least we want to give the Iranian chance at least to work and help and reduce the maritime tension.
We've only got 2 minutes left. So Mohammad Marandi, let me get your response to the comments you just heard, and then I'll get a final word from David. Go ahead.
Well, first, I'd like to point out that the problems between Iran and Saudi did not start with the storming of the embassy, which was not condoned by the government. That's a misleading statement, but I don't want to go there. With regards to the region, Hezbollah and its allies, of course, won the election in Lebanon, but all of the parties must work together. Hezbollah never receives orders from Tehran, and I think that is something that Western powers should come to recognize. In fact, I would say that Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah has more influence in Tehran than I think you're being a bit silly here.
Okay, yeah.
Whenever you finish laughing, I can continue.
Sorry. Please continue.
Let's
it's
be
interesting. You think Hassan Nasrallah has more influence in Tehran?
Don't be a child.
I'm doing my best, but it's so.
Don't be a child. Don't be a child.
You're making it hard.
Be an adult.
You're making it hard.
Be an adult. Be an adult.
I'm trying my best.
Be an adult.
I'm trying my best. You're not making it easy.
You're not a 6-year-old.
Okay. At least, I mean, I don't know. Maybe it's good to see things.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't want to say lighthearted because it's a little too ironic in the laughter there, but Mohammad Marandi, quickly finish. We only have 30 seconds left.
yes, Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, he has an extraordinarily huge amount of influence in Lebanon and across the region and in Tehran. And if the Americans are the ones who have proxies, so they think that all of the countries that they antagonize have proxies. Iran's friends across the region are allies. And what Iran wants to do is decrease tensions with countries in the region like Saudi Arabia so that the region can live in peace without American meddling.
Mohammad Marandi, we will have to leave it there. I'd like to thank all three of my panelists so much for being with us on this edition of The Newsmakers. Unfortunately, we're completely out of time. So I'll thank our viewers for being with us as well. And remember, you can follow us on Twitter, and do be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.